All right, folks. We're going to keep this train moving, starting our next session. This session is Sex, Food, and Pain, Internet-Delivered Interventions via Diverse Devices. Wow, this is going to be good stuff. And hopefully we're going to encourage people to trickle back in from lunch. We still have some stray folks out there. We're going to keep moving. Our first speaker is Dr. Christine Rini, who's a research associate professor in the Department of Health Behavior at the Gillings School of Global Public Health and a member of UNC Lineberger's Comprehensive Cancer Center. She's also a member of the Thurston Arthritis Research Center and the Center for Genomics and Society. Her research focuses on how psychosocial resources and risk factors influence people's resilience and vulnerability to health-related stressors. Her work also seeks to translate findings to behavioral interventions, including interventions delivered via the internet.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Let's see. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you today about a program that I've recently developed. We're currently testing it in a randomized controlled trial. It's called Pain Coach, and it's developed to teach people how to manage pain related to osteoarthritis. So it is a collaboration of UNC and researchers at Duke University, including Frank Keith at Duke, who developed an intervention called Pain Coping Skills Training. And it was tested originally in person with people coping with osteoarthritis pain. So hence, when we translated it to be delivered via the web, we chose to translate it for this same population. So this is an empirically supported intervention. It has traditionally been delivered in person in group sessions, and it's been delivered by trained clinical psychologists. So it uses a cognitive behavioral approach, and it teaches skills for changing thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that contribute to pain and disability. And for people who are familiar with a cognitive behavioral approach, this would include skills for managing behaviors and cognition. So things like relaxation, distraction techniques, cognitive reappraisal, and various things like that. For osteoarthritis, you also have things like activity pacing to help people learn how to be more active without doing damage to their joints. So there are some very important components to cognitive behavioral interventions and to pain coping skills training in particular. And at the foundation, there is education about a biopsychosocial model of pain. It provides a therapeutic rationale so people understand why they're learning these skills and how they work. It's highly personalized skills training, and people also learn methods to ensure that they can apply the skills in day-to-day life and that they stay motivated to use them. So typically, the clinical psychologist, as I mentioned, would teach this in a group setting in person over 8 to 12 weeks, and each session would take about 60 to 90 minutes. So when we were getting ready to translate this to the web, after we received a nice grant to do that, and we put together our research team, we were faced, as people have mentioned here already, with a lot of decisions to make, and sometimes relatively little empirical guidance for making those decisions. And one of the things that I really want to highlight today is that cognitive behavioral interventions, like many behavioral science interventions, and that includes pain coping skills training, they have a number of therapeutically active ingredients that go well beyond education. So there are many great things we do to enhance education online. We have multimedia capabilities and tailoring and all sorts of great things. But what I want to highlight is that when we do these interventions in purpose, there are these more subtle things going on that are really critically important to their benefits. So for instance, in cognitive behavioral interventions, we have a working alliance that develops between the therapist and the client. And it's a key predictor of positive outcomes in these kinds of therapies. As I mentioned, the training is highly personalized, and a therapist was taught to be responsive both to verbal and nonverbal cues by clients that they may not be accepting or understanding or feeling like they're able to do what they need to do. There's social modeling and vicarious learning that happens when people are in a group setting and they're listening to other people respond and other people ask questions, bringing up things that perhaps they hadn't even thought about, but that will be important to them down the line as they try to make changes in their day-to-day life. So these are just examples, and I guess what the point I want to make here is there's a lot going on in these in-person interventions that are theoretically based in cognitive behavioral therapies and other behavioral science therapies as well. Cognitive behavioral therapies just happen to be pretty common and probably perhaps the most common approach when we do these kinds of interventions. So when you translate these interventions for delivery via the web, I guess the point I want to make here is that it's really critical to try to capture these therapeutic processes that are so important in in-person training. And now I will say I'm a social health psychologist. I've worked very closely with clinical psychologists on projects that have to do with cognitive behavioral therapy. So I have some familiarity with how they're done and you know, how you structure this kind of an intervention. I also have a background in writing for the web and writing educational content. So I thought I was pretty good at this. But I'm going to mention a couple of ways in which I learned a lot about how it is you need to try to maintain these therapeutically active ingredients in this online intervention. So when we started our intervention, we started developing Pain Coach, we had focus groups and we had some really terrific consultants and a review of any literature that we thought would be useful, for instance, on usability. We have an older population, osteoarthritis patients, a lot of whom did not have any computer experience. The first step in this process basically was for me to take the in-person content and translate it to a wireframe, which is just a plan for how a session is going to look. And what are we going to say? What are the screens? What's going to appear on the screens? And then I would take it to my team, who would then give me feedback. And it was quite an eye-opening experience for me because even with the in-person resources and materials, my first stab had to change profoundly. And so what we did was we started with one session, developed it with the team, created a working version of it, got user feedback. We did the whole iterative development that many people do. The difference here, and I wish I could take credit for this, but this was really Frank Keefe's idea, was that we had on our team, our development team, 4 clinical psychologists who together had over 90 years of experience delivering pain coping skills training in person and could give us feedback on the things that unfold in an in-person environment and make sure that we recreated them online. So I had planned to create the program and then get feedback from these same kinds of experts through focus groups. As it turns out, having them on the team was really critical. Some of the things they did for us. So when I presented my first stab at what a session would look like, they were able to look at it and say, not going to work. So they were able to take a look at it and say, at this point in the session, people are not going to get it because we know after having delivered this many, many times, this is a difficult concept for people. Here are exactly the kinds of things they're going to misunderstand or have a problem understanding. Here are the exact ways that we deal with this and where we can watch people gain an understanding if we do it just this way. And if we do it just this way, we see these improvements in things like self-efficacy and outcome expectancies, and things operating the way that we need them to support behavioral change. Overall, also, they just made sure that we spoke to patients in this program in the way that they spoke to them in person. And I have to tell you, I would never have known how to do this without this direct feedback from them. It was a very eye-opening experience for me. So I want to give you an example of just one little part of one of the sessions that really benefited from their involvement, so you can kind of see what I mean by all this. But first, let me just give you an overview of the Pain Coach program. It's a web application. It's accessed with touchscreen tablets. We use iPads. It's 8 sessions, completed 1 per week. The sessions last about 35 to 40 minutes. And we have a virtual coach who acts as our therapist or guide through the program, speaking directly to the user. It is a completely automated program. We have no real therapist behind any of the responses, so we're completely dependent on tailoring and algorithms to deliver messages. The information is delivered in audio. It's the coach's voice, again, speaking directly to the user, and only the most important text is on screen. We take a pretty directive approach. There are very few decision points. Again, we're working with a population who may not have a lot of computer experience. We wanted to keep this very simple, and we also use very simple navigation. And so a typical session works where they review any practice that they completed from the skill they learned the prior week. In a cognitive behavioral approach, home practice is really critical. People need to use these behaviors in their daily life and work through the problems that they have as they give that a try. And then the therapist helps them work through any problems. They get training in a new skill. They actually have to practice the new skill while they're sitting there in front of the program. And then we unpack their experience, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. We set practice goals for the week, and we give them tips for practicing. And then we make an appointment with the coach. So the coach says, you know, is this time next week good for you? We're really trying to increase a sense of accountability and using some of the norms of social interactions to make people feel like they have a responsibility to come back and to do their practice and complete the program. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about this unpacking concept, which wasn't a part of my plan at the beginning, and which was added because the therapist said it was really a critical part of making sure people start learning and using these skills. So what's unpacking? So this comes after the coach teaches the skill and people have a chance to try it, they're guided through it in an exercise right there in front of the screen. And the purpose of unpacking is, first of all, to draw attention to how people did it. They need to pay attention to what position their body was in, what they noticed going on in their body and their thoughts and their emotions as they were doing this. And we also really wanted them to notice the positive parts of their experience. What did they notice that they liked about what they did? So this is all intended to increase self-efficacy, for example. We do need to address problems. We don't want people sitting there feeling frustrated or like they don't understand. So we can't ignore the problems, but the overall approach was very positive, and that was a really important thing as we talked about this around the table with the development team, is that primarily the approach was very positive. So if anybody's read anything on celebratory approaches to health technology, this was very consistent with that. So again, in these unpacking sessions, the coach is responding to people in a way that promotes development of a trusting, collaborative relationship. This is a very important working alliance. Increasing self-efficacy, so people feel like they can use these skills to manage their pain, and also decreasing barriers to pain skill use. So we don't want people coming away from the session feeling like they can't use them or feeling like it's a very unsatisfying experience. So, and just one little element, in person, a therapist may do this by responding in a particular way and talking in a particular way to people. So the therapist would have verbal and nonverbal responses that communicate, that are very genuine and communicate warmth. They communicate understanding and respect so that patients or clients feel valued and heard and understood. And so we're doing this online with, a photograph of a coach and audio and tailoring. So we have to make sure that our coach is relatable and responds with warmth and acceptance. We spent a lot of time figuring out exactly what wording should be used, and we use tailoring to promote a sense of being understood and respected. This is our coach, and this is what our screens look like. Again, very, very simple. And this was the beginning of this unpacking sessions, and I'm just going to show you a few screens from it. But first, one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is that people learn vicariously from others in the group, and we wanted to recreate that experience as well. And one of the things the therapist told me at this point in the session was that if you just ask people, what was your practice like? What did you notice? Most people just can't respond to that. They don't understand what it is you're looking for. But they learn from listening to other people respond and from the therapist giving them examples. Again, we didn't have that luxury, so we had to recreate that. So the coach would say, people have different experiences when they first try progressive relaxation. This was the skill we were focusing on. So she's normalizing experiences, good, bad, or otherwise. And then the people who were using the program had a chance to learn about others' experiences. And we had 3 characters we used throughout the program who would sort of act like they were part of a group and give examples of how they responded as a way of modeling what kinds of responses we were looking for and how other people think about this practice. So one person would say, my legs felt very heavy. I've never felt anything quite like that before. Actually, as I relaxed each muscle group, I felt that. And another person would say, I really felt this sense of calm. And in fact, even after I finished the practice, it lingered for a while. And then sometimes we used our social models to get at some of the anticipated problems and address them. So we had one of our characters say, you know, at first I was distracted, but then I realized I could put my worries aside for a while. And after our users got a chance to see what we were looking for and trying to understand what their experience was like, we had them think again about their own experience, where they practiced, what body position they were in, changes in their feelings and emotions and thoughts that they experienced during practice. And this was an exercise they were walked through. And then we had them report to us what changes they experienced. This was the exercise that we created for them to do that. So we had some experiences that the therapist said were very common when people do this exercise, and they were able to drag these little boxes around and tell us, do they feel more of this, less of this, or no change in that. And then based on their responses, we gave them a tailored encouragement or suggestion so that they felt like we had heard them and were responding to what they told us about their experience. Again, as much as possible, focusing on the positive and encouraging them, normalizing any problems that they had, but responding to them as if they were in a session with a live person and trying to, again, build that working alliance. We remind people that these are skills. The more they practice them, the better they get. And encourage them that, you know, they're doing something positive for themselves. And we're currently running the randomized trial. We should have findings from our post-intervention assessment shortly. In the meantime, we collected some data just to get some feedback, and it was very encouraging. So, for instance, 71% of our respondents strongly agreed or somewhat agreed that they felt like the coach understood them. 86% felt that the program helped them with difficulties using their skills and convinced them that pain coping skills were important. That's 96%. Hearing other people's experiences were useful by the vast majority, and the exercises helped them understand the skills and how to use them. And the information in the sessions was useful. I will say this as well. Out of the 113 people who we randomized, so I think it was 58 people in the intervention arm, all but 3 of them completed every single session. So we had almost no attrition. And the people who did not complete it, and I think there were 4 all in all, several of them did stay in the study to complete our follow-up assessments, so they were intent to treat. But the reasons they dropped out had to do with life circumstances or serious health problems, and not that they lost interest in the program. So we seem to have had a very high degree of engagement. So just in summary, I'm talking about cognitive behavioral therapies here, and because it's a very common approach and because it's the approach we use, I think that this may generalize to other kinds of approaches as well, for instance, mindfulness. But education is a critical component, and it's the part that's probably easiest to translate online. But there are other therapeutically active ingredients that happen in an in-person setting that are really crucial to the benefits we get from these kinds of therapies. And to the extent we want to develop powerful interventions online, we need to try to translate these same kind of active ingredients to the online environment. And in my case, because I'm not a clinician myself and because there's very little empirical evidence to guide me, having these experts on the team bear with me day by day as we put together our plans was really very important, and the program would have been very, very different without them, and I would contend probably not as effective. I don't have the data to support that yet, but my strong hunch is, and I think, and it's also reasonable to assume, that if there are things going on in the interperson intervention that are critical to its success, we have to have those things going on online as well to get the biggest bang for our buck when we translate these interventions to the online environment. I want to thank my study team. It's a big team here at UNC and at Duke, and also acknowledging my funding from NIAMS and NIH. Thank you very much.
All right, folks. Very good. Our next speakers, actually, we have I believe we're going to have a professor-student duo here for this next talk. Dr. Alice Ammer is a professor of nutrition at the Gilling School of Global Public Health and director of the Center for Health Promotion and Disease Prevention at UNC. She's also co-PI of the UNC Center for Population and Health Disparities. And she is going to co-present with Tasha Smith, who's a graduate research assistant at UNC Center for Health Promotion and Disease Prevention and a doctoral student in the Department of Nutrition and School of Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill.
So we are the food part of the, I want to say sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but not quite that. Okay, so we're going to talk about taste texting and using behavioral economics. How many of you are familiar with behavioral economics? Like many of you. Just a quick example, if anyone's read the book Nudge, the kind of classic example that's used there is in a large airport. It was discovered that the men's urinals were always very messy. They're spending thousands of dollars cleaning them, and somebody came up with the idea of putting a decal of a fly in the middle of the urinal, and apparently that was fun to aim at. So suddenly that took care of their problem. They didn't have to put up any signs that said, you know, don't make a mess, your mother is not coming after you, and all the things you see in the lunchroom about that. So anyway, so it's that idea, and a lot of times it does involve fun. It's something that kind of nudges people in the direction of where you want to go with the behavior, but doesn't necessarily wag your finger at them. So I was looking at this before. This paw print here relates to the high school where we've been testing it, and I'm just thinking that all three schools in the Chapel Hill Carborough district where we're trying this happen to have large cats as their, so that worked out well for us. So just a little bit in terms of school lunch program. As we probably all know, even if we don't do work in nutrition, a very small percentage of U.S. adolescents really meet the dietary guidelines. But school lunch program is a big part of their diet, and there's a large proportion of their food intake that can come from school. And just in this district alone, we have 3,000 high school students. So it is a way to reach a lot of people. So some of the challenges of the school lunch program. If you think of the student perspective, is you've probably all heard that these days, because of the pressures of instructional time and other things, the lunch periods are very short. Now in high schools, all of the schools around here and in other parts of the country, all of the kids eat at the same time. So the time period's a little bit longer. They want the kids to be able to meet in clubs and get help from teachers. But it means that you might have 1,200 kids descending on the cafeteria at one time. So that means long lines. I have 3 boys who went through the public school system. They never, even though I wanted them to be my spies, you know, for the school lunch program, they never really wanted to eat the school lunch because they had to wait in line forever. So that's a motivating factor for them. And then, of course, for kids' health in high school is not generally the highest priority, and also school lunch is sort of terminally uncool in many ways. And in terms of that perspective, there's a lot of pressure now from Jamie Oliver and others on the whole school lunch program. And a lot of parents are taking a lot of interest here in terms of really trying to increase healthy lunch options. Plus, there's a lot of things coming down from the federal government, when it's working, in terms of really requiring healthier options. I think you'd be surprised if you haven't visited school lunch programs recently that there is a lot of change going on. But that can make it challenging for the schools, and that often healthier items, like now they're being required to serve more whole grain products and more fruits and vegetables, and those cost more. A really important part to understand about the school lunch program is that it has to operate like a business. They really have to either break even or bring in money in order to pay their staff, buy the food. But they don't get any kind of supplement for that. And if you think about a food business, they're one of the rare food businesses where the government requires them to sell food to their customers that they don't really prefer. So they're having to sell healthy food and make money doing that, but the kids would just as soon buy ice cream and pizza. So it makes for a challenge. So as we're moving more in the direction of healthier food by policy, there's more challenges of getting the kids to actually eat it. So it's very important for the schools to be able to get high participation rates, because even if it's from the kids who are on free or reduced price meals, they get the reimbursement from USDA. And high school is particularly problematic in terms of getting kids to participate. So our question was, is it possible to get kids to buy healthier school lunch options? And can we make it more convenient as part of the kind of nudge factor? And then at the same time, another important factor of what we're trying to achieve is increasing participation in the school lunch. So we developed something we call taste texting. It was a product of a bunch of my students getting together and thinking about it, several who are in the room, and Tasha being one of them. And so we have this kind of mass texting program where students are prompted via text message to pre-order their lunch, starting the night before and then up until about 10 o'clock, so that the lunch cafeteria has enough time to adapt. We only put the healthier options available for the texting system. We don't say that, of course, because that would be the kiss of death to tell the kids that, you know, order your healthy lunch option now. We just say, order your lunch option now, and also you get to choose a time window when you can pick it up. So that cuts way back on the line. Then there's a separate kiosk where they can pick that up. So they pre-order, and part of the behavioral economics notion is that you order in advance. It's kind of like having a grocery list when you go to the store rather than just going when you're hungry and buying everything you see. So in terms of this notion of taste texting and the system, we use both the web and the text-based. And the behavioral economics, again, and this notion that rather than explicitly telling people that you need to order a healthy lunch, we make it easier for them to do that and more fun and convenient. So it's really incentivizing their behavior with convenience. Also, rather than waiting until they're in the lunch line where it's chaotic and noisy, and also they're smelling the French fries, they're ordering it in advance. This is that was the center that provided the funding. Brian Wanzik is behind this. I don't know if you may have heard of some of his work he wrote. He's a researcher, but he also writes some lay books like Mindless Eating. He has some interesting research where he rigs up all these experimental things where he manages to keep refilling somebody's soup bowl as they're eating from it. He has a tube underneath it, and then tests whether if you continue to get more soup, you'll just keep eating it as long as it's in there. And sure enough, that's what he finds. He also gives people huge buckets of stale popcorn and then puts them in the movie theater, and it seems that they eat it all just because they're, you know, distracted and it's in front of them. So Tasha's going to take over after our pilot study. You've got your own there, right? Okay.
All right. So this project, like many of the projects we've heard about this morning, is pretty new. And since we built the technology from scratch, we really wanted to make sure that it was going to work before we rolled it out district-wide. So we just got together, and even though this calls it like a pilot, this is really more like a proof of concept. So we partnered with one local school and with the student leadership of that student body, in their social networks and just said, can you try out this program kind of secretly and let us know your feedback? So we surveyed them pre and post, and so as you can see, the pilot duration was really short, and it was toward the end of the school year. We had about 59 students enrolled, but of those, only 36, so 61% of the people said, sure, I'll try it out. Only 36 actually used the program. And of those 36, 10 used the program only once, and then they were done. But we did have some pretty heavy users. Of the additional 26 people, averaged about 10 lunches each. And it's not listed on this slide, but in that short period, we sold almost, I think it was like 300 lunches. So pretty good engagement, even though it was late in the year. So the findings from that says technology works. Huzzah. I think we had about 2 missed orders out of almost 300 lunches, which is a pretty great error rate. So we feel confident going forward in inviting more people to participate. It had a really good reception with the students and the school food vendor. The technology on the front end for the user worked, and it also worked on the back end. So positive about that. So on the pre-test, or the post-test actually, after the students had used the program and we asked for their feedback, the 2 most important considerations they said that they had when they were considering whether or not to use taste texting on any given day to order their lunch was the taste of the food, so what was on offer, and the time that they spent in line. So if they had a particularly packed lunch period that day, they had some homework to do, whatever, then they might use taste texting to order lunch that day. So, and most participants reported that it was somewhat easy to very easy to use. So it's pretty intuitive, menu-based interface, works pretty well. And I don't know how clear this is, but of the heavy users, about half of them said, how important is taste texting when you decide whether or not you're going to order lunch that day? And about half of them said that it was somewhat to extremely important, which is great because, granted, it's limited feedback, but as we scale up and do an actually controlled pilot, we're excited about this feedback. So yeah, getting the future directions, we're going to test in a local high school with 1,300 students. There's an additional high school that has an identical menu that we'll use as a control group. And then in the actual pilot that we're looking to roll out now, we're going to test whether or not the program actually helps us meet those 2 goals, whether or not students choose healthier options and whether we can really increase participation. Challenges, yeah, so there are many challenges when you're trying to do work like this, many more than the 3 listed here. So how to define healthy, what you define as healthy school lunch, especially with new regulations, it's really difficult. School lunch these days, thankfully, is pretty heavily regulated, so what qualifies as a reimbursable meal, you have to consider all parts of that, or you can't actually sell it. And negotiating with our school food vendor who works as a community partner in this particular project, getting both of us on that same page has definitely been a challenge, but doable so far. So speaking of which, our collaborators, we're really grateful for the USDA, Cornell Center for funding this particular research. For our child nutrition team, district-wide, if you have schools in Chapel Hill, Carborough, or if you have kids in the local district schools, they serve fabulous lunch. They're great people to work with. Leap Designs for Designing and Technology, and Seth Noor, who you heard from earlier, and the rest of the people in Alice's lab who helped make it happen. So, thanks.
All right, folks. Well, our last speaker took the red eye last night just to be here for this presentation. So we saved the best for last. Dr. Lisa Hartog-Weidman is an associate professor of medicine and infectious diseases at UNC Chapel Hill. Excuse me. Her research interests include primary and secondary HIV prevention interventions for gay, bisexual, and non-identifying young MSM men using both the internet and other technologies, and linkage and retention to care for young MSM of color.
Hit this one. Well, thank you all. I will try and make sense. I think today I flew in from San Francisco and just got in this morning, so I'm a little jet lagged. I tried to drink. I tried to take meds. You know, I did everything I possibly could to sleep, but it didn't work. So forgive me. So I am the sex part of the talk, which is I think it's the coolest. But you know, the taste texting is cool. I want to actually do that at home for dinner, but nobody will make me my dinner, so I think it would just be a wasted text. So I'm going to talk about healthempowerment.org, which is our internet-based intervention for Black MSM, young Black MSM. And, oh, went the wrong way. There we go. So health empowerment started a long time ago. If you can remember, try and remember way back when we didn't get on the internet on our phones, when we weren't on Facebook, when, you know, even maybe a little bit before MySpace. So, you know, and definitely before Justin Timberlake took over MySpace. So way back when sort of we were thinking, and I think Seth was, sorry I missed your talk. I would have rather been here. But, you know, of sort of the first really computer-based interventions. It was us and our patients interacting with a computer. And interactive meant that they got asked a question, and then there was some sort of tailored response. And that was kind of the level of interaction. And so that was when I got my first grant to do this work. And it came from the fact that we saw, and we continue to see, HIV infection in young Black MSM. And they're really disproportionately affected, really of any age group, of any racial group, of any risk behavior group. And that continues. And so we thought, well, let's design an intervention to meet the young men where they are. And it was the rise of kind of sex seeking online. So, and again, this is, you know, before you could actually find sex partners on your phone, where you actually still had to use your desktop to get on gay.com or Adam for Adam, so these sort of sites. So we thought, well, they're using the internet to meet sex partners. Let's design an intervention to reach them. And so we did, and we worked with the Chi Corps throughout, and they've been wonderful in helping us design an intervention. And so this is our first attempt. This is what I call Health Empowerment version 1. And this is very, you know, at the time, very cutting edge. You know, it had a lot of interactive changing content. And again, I apologize for not being sort of what was presented earlier, but sort of, you know, the idea of what are the things that make things sticky, what interventions work. And a lot of it was the content changed, that people were engaged, that they thought it was credible, you know, that there were people behind it that didn't seem like they didn't know what they were doing. So we tried to incorporate all that, and as well as sort of knowledge. So obviously knowledge is needed for behavior change, but it's not the only thing that can be included. And we did an accessibility trial, 50 young Black MSM, and we sort of compared our site to the currently available sites at the time. And we found that there was some changes. We saw some positive changes, mainly around improvements in depression, and so some changes in sort of movement towards greater condom use behaviors. My Lord. Okay. So, but then the world changed, right? The world changed, and we all became on Facebook. No, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of us became on Facebook. We began to interact with other people using our computers, and that changed how we used the internet, right? And it also became, you know, we got on the phone, you know, internet through our phones. So the iPhone, the Droid, all the phones came out. And so people, when we ran this trial, they said, this is great, but it doesn't do anything. Like, you know, it doesn't, like, you can't talk to anyone, you don't really get any feedback, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't give me any points. Like, you know, I go on this Nike website and they give me points, I get stuff. So they said, you know, we want to play games. We want to, you know, again, this is before Angry Birds, but they wanted to interact with other people, they wanted to engage. And then they said, you know, we go to our phones and they could get it on their phones, but it was like, you know, again, in the early days when a site wasn't designed for mobile and you went on it and everything was scrunched and annoying and you just got frustrated and you're trying to stretch the screen, and so that was a turnoff. So we thought to ourselves, could we actually sort of learn what we sort of know about Facebook and some of the sex sites that these young guys are using, and could we build a virtual community? Could we sort of take health empowerment and turn it into more of a social networking site, as I kind of say, kind of Facebook with a focus, and a focus around changing norms and behaviors. And so, again, we sort of thought, you know, what can we do? How can we sort of change the site to do something different? And we went back to our theoretical model, and we said, you know what, it sort of fits in sort of the behavior change, but maybe we need to think differently about our conceptual models when we think about new media. And what are the roles of virtual communities in terms of improving social support, providing peer support, mutual counseling and sharing of experiences. And so this is health empowerment. I call it 2.1. I'm not giving you 2.0. I thank Deb. Deb came in around 2.0, and now we're at 2.1. And I think it's really, we're getting there. As you can see from our phone version, we are almost done, and that's good. So it's designed for mobile, so it's responsive web design, so things kind of shrink up as they're supposed to when you're on your phone or your tablet. It doesn't really matter what size device you use it on, you still get what we want you to get. And it doesn't matter if the next piece of technology has a screen that's this size that becomes the fad, it'll still work. And again, I'll take you through a little bit through kind of what pieces of the site. So again, still we keep this sort of idea of information, knowledge is important. But I think what I've come to learn, and it maybe took me longer than other people, is that HIV is not the main important thing in the lives of these young men. You know, I'm obsessed with it, but these guys, you know, that's not something that they think about. There's other things, life skills, health and wellness, love, dating. You know, we talk about risk, they talk about love. You know, we talk about sex, they talk about, you know, dating. And so, you know, again, trying to put this in the context of the lives that they're living rather than all this information that we want sort of to them to absorb. Sort of testing and care resources. Again, you know, sort of, you know, the idea of the cascade. How do we get more people tested? How do we get them more engaged in care? How can we use current resources that are out there to make it easy for them? So our programmer, Jess, was able to put in the AIDS.gov widget. So then, now I don't have to update this. I can let the government, when it's open, update it. So I actually haven't tested and seen whether this works currently. Probably should, Kate. But this, you know, again, you can find housing, HIV testing, all sort of, and you know, it's linked to your map, so you can actually walk there, drive there. And then this is kind of the centerpiece, is sort of this connection, this community of social networking, and it's hinged on a few components. Getting Real is our piece where we have users submit audio, video, whether they show their face or not, poetry, about different topics, which you can see coming out, disclosure. So this is an intervention for positive and negative guys, because the networks intertwine, the behaviors intertwine, the concerns, the life experiences can intertwine. It is still a continuum, right? That people with HIV continue to have sex, and people that are uninfected go through periods where they may or may not be at risk. So all these topics, and then again, other people can comment on it, like it. Obviously, there's no dislike button, and this is monitored. You know, while you want people to sort of have freedom of speech, we certainly aren't going to allow this site to become some sort of hate, you know, a hate ground if, you know, if people have sort of opinions that would hurt other people. The forum is just really kind of what it sounds like, a question and answer period. Again, around sort of, we sort of directive, you know, we're directive as sort of, as the other speaker was saying, of sort of what we want them to think and talk about. And again, you know, dating, safer sex, testing, but also other things. That's our connection to care. So again, a lot of the young guys have never interacted with a provider, and so that's intimidating, whether they're getting tested or entering into care, so they can ask questions. That's me. Little shorter haircut, a lot more sleep. And we try and answer the questions pretty quickly. I'm sort of obsessive, so I probably answer them a little too rapidly, but again, a way to sort of engage and just sort of talk about things that they might have questions on. And then we have a store, a connection to care store. So one of the things that we're offering is, this is a pilot, is will these guys order STD testing or HIV testing through our site online and then and get tested. So as you know, the FDA has approved an HIV home test. It's about $45. So we're providing it free through home access, and then we're working with a company that actually does STD testing online to do urine and rectal swabs. Tools for health, again, ways to be engaging, to think about things in different ways. So I think one of the things that you know, with the online is that you don't know where they're going to go, you don't know what sections they're going to visit, and unless you're very directive and you have sort of I think as sort of the first speaker mentioned, an intervention that really guides them through each stage, something like this, they can go anywhere. So we wanted to sort of reinforce what we wanted them to get out of the intervention in multiple places and in multiple ways. So we have quizzes, screeners, goal-setting exercises as well. And then we sort of wanted to bring in gamification, so the use of sort of gaming mechanics and sort of non-game scenarios. So the way I think about it is these points, badges, and leaderboards. So in gaming, there's sort of clear goals, there's clear rules to games, right? But if you do well, you can move ahead, and you can move ahead by getting points, and you can either redeem them for virtual goods, real goods, or just your status can move up. It feels good to move up and be on the top of the leaderboard, even if it doesn't mean anything. But you're the top of the list. So people like that. Some people are motivated by that. Some people don't. Some people are motivated by the fact that one guy really wanted to win a messenger bag that we have. He really wanted that. That motivated him, fine. So it's trying to figure out kind of what motivates people. And as you interact with the site, you get more points. So we've finished our field trial, and again, as so like the other presenter said, it wasn't really a pilot trial. It was kind of a test of to see if it works, see what pieces of the site the guys liked, and kind of just sort of start to figure out kind of how they would use it. So we enrolled 15 guys. Again, it wasn't a randomized control. They all got, basically met with our research assistant, got the site put on their phone, and they said, have fun, use it for 4 weeks, come back in, and let's see how you felt. 20 to 30, meaning age 26, about two-thirds or a little less than two-thirds were positive. Again, you can see the split in sexual identity. Low income, I think, which continues to argue that the digital divide is really gone and obsolete, which I think reinforces those of us that work in this field. We have to keep letting the NIH know that these are feasible things to apply for. This was our usage, again, 28 days, so the website was visited over 500 times. We had about, of the 15 guys, about 11 that were kind of heavy users, a couple that were moderate users, and a couple that didn't use it very much. One who had an issue with logging in and his password the first time, and that discouraged him from coming back. Average time was about 9 minutes. You ask me what that means, and I don't know. I think we're still figuring out how much time is enough, what does engagement mean, and Nina, who works with me as a poster, I think it's poster 4. But, we're trying to sort of think about what do these metrics mean of engagement. We measure engagement in in-person interventions. We direct it, We want this many sessions for this period of time. How much do we need? I know you've done some work on that, Seth. It's a little bit more, not too few, but what is the magic number, and how does that vary by what you're actually having them do on the intervention? What we found, again, in small numbers, 15 guys, 100% retention. We did qualitative exit interviews with them after. But we saw positive changes, actually statistically significant, although, again, very small numbers, so effect size is low, but with improvements in their levels of social support, decreased levels of social isolation, decreased depressive symptoms, and they all loved the site sort of overall. Their main complaints was sort of how it looked, and so they actually want Health Empowerment 2.0, and so we adjusted it to 2.1, and I think it looks even 10 times better than it did. Overall thoughts, again, really sort of the hands-on piece. Let you read. This is another young man. So this is kind of the theme. People seem to like it. They wanted to engage with other people. They learned more from the others who were using the site than sort of us. So upcoming plans, we are getting ready to launch our statewide RCT, really probably within the next 2 weeks. And, again, always thinking about adaptation, dissemination of the site. We're continuing to, again, think through pieces of it and sort of trying to evaluate what parts of it sort of work, what parts of it aren't needed. We've streamlined a lot with a lot of help from other experts of sort of, maybe some of this was, too much. Because there's always sort of that, well, we could do this, and we could do this, and we can do this, and that would be cool, but really trying to be more focused, which is one of my problems, focus. And just really quickly in the last 30 seconds, this is another grant that we just got funded This is a small business grant. We're working with a local technology development company called Cactus that's in Carborough. And this was a small business grant to develop a mobile app for medication adherence for young Black MSM. And again, it's using the same principles of health empowerment, so the gaming idea and the social networking idea. So kind of what are the things that are going to engage these young men to come back, to use an app, and not just sort of download it and throw it away. And so this is our screenshots that we put in the grant. We've actually moved along, and we have our first focus group tomorrow with the guys, so I unfortunately didn't put those screenshots in. But we've really, the kind of the key points is sort of competition. Individuals and groups can have challenges to sort of, you get paired with people that have better and worse adherence than you, collaboration, support, again, receiving and giving motivation, and then self-assessment in terms of tracking of progress and goal setting. So I think for me, I think eHealth is obviously being used, as you've heard earlier, to deliver many aspects of HIV prevention and care for MSM, particularly young MSM. I think, what I learned and what I kind of keep thinking is that technology can't replicate face-to-face interactions. Sometimes those are really critical. I'm an HIV provider, so I think the interactions I have with my patients are really important. But can technology be used to kind of facilitate and engage these, young men to participate in more in-person things? Can it destigmatize and demystify care so that they'll come in? Can it, make them change the social norms so they'll want to get tested more, they'll feel more comfortable? Thinking about, again, engagement. How are you going to get, these guys have a lot of other stuff going on in their lives. There's a lot of other cooler things than sort of an HIV prevention sort of, app. There's a lot of more fun things on the internet to do. So how can, again, you use some of the game mechanics or other things that companies use to engage them? Because if you can engage them, then you get a chance to sort of give them the messages you want. If you can't engage them in the first place, then it really doesn't matter what you're doing. And again, I think for us, this kind of iterative, constant going back to the target population, constantly sort of asking them, constantly being sort of understand what's changing in their world has really sort of been indispensable in learning sort of what works and what doesn't work and being able to make changes and adapt. So I have a lot of people, my team members, some of which are here, the developers, specifically the Chi-Core and Cactus for our newer grant, and then a lot of experts, consultants, and certainly the funders who are currently not funding, but hopefully they will again. Thank you.
So do you all have any questions for this panel? Thanks, panel. Those were all great talks. I would say that I've heard mentioned, and I think it's probably true and smart, that we need to think like small businesses where part of their plan is how they're going to market their product and get it out there, because people have busy lives and they have other things going on. So in that sense, they're ahead of us in getting things accepted and used, and we often don't take that approach. So that would be one thought that would come to mind for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's what I've been doing lately. Is the last 2 or 3 grants I've submitted have been small business grants, and so again, I think that world they know about return on investment and they think about it more clearly than we do. I think sometimes we are limited by we're writing an NIH grant and it's being reviewed by reviewers who want to see, they're very stuck on this sort of RCT testing outcomes, and I think that there's some that are trying to change it. There's some sort of specific like POs that are have thought about this in NIMH. Susanna Allison is one, and who are trying to think about pushing the envelope at NIH to think about different sort of methodologies. But I think it's tough because technology development is really expensive, and yet, and the NIH, the way that sort of NIH is sort of structured, you kind of need that formative data, but it's very hard to develop it with the budgets of an R21, which would be kind of a grant to do that. So I do think it's challenging. I think they're thinking differently about it. I was just at a meeting up there where they're actually we were talking about that, innovative ways to think about sort of these types of things. But I think your question is very well. I don't have a great answer.
I think you actually gave the example of integrating into what people are already doing or using, Ryan, and that seems certainly important. And I guess thinking in our case, in some ways I think of it kind of like taking some of the fast food marketing notion and applying it like it's cool, it's fast, it's convenient, and trying to manipulate that to fit with what you're trying to do. So if you can, again, it goes back to some of the marketing and make that work in your favor.
And I don't know, just another quick comment too, I don't know that this would be encouraging at all, but I think in public health, especially like intervention research, that's a problem that plagues, even interventions that aren't tech related. So you develop an intervention, you test it, it works, and then what? Like dissemination is a big problem there too, so it's not just tech related.
Any other questions? Yep. They really varied. Some of them were incredibly brief, but they were never very long. We didn't use video. We didn't actually have the budget for video. So we used the same approach that we used with the coach, and that is photos that change so that her body postures would go along with the audio. But in general, they were all quite brief, and they were just meant to illustrate a concept or address problems that might have popped into somebody's head that we thought we could address most effectively with social modeling. No, I don't actually, but I probably have those data. That's good to know. Yeah. I'll have to look at my back-end data and see if we have that timestamp, but I don't know. I can look.
Well, anybody who signs up for it gets a proactive text that says, hey, would you like to order school lunch today? In fact, some of the feedback is that they got a few too many of those. Yeah. So we have to figure out, how to titrate that so it's enough, but not too many. like if they weren't fast enough responding, or you have to set all those kind of parameters. That's good. Where did she go to school?
I mean, I have a 6-year-old, and you could do it to me. That would be helpful. I would prefer it instead of making lunches. Yeah. I mean, have you thought about including, like, parents?
Actually, we have had people mentioning that, and in fact, we have some parents on some committees that have been pretty interested in it. And, a big part of the whole social marketing of school lunch is to get parents to realize that school lunch is changing and improving. And we had one of the favorite quotes of the school lunch people is that a student said, couldn't possibly be the school lunch because it's too good, and I don't think you've been eating it fabulous here.
Like, it's kind of amazing how great it is.
My son calls it, he eats in the cafe every day. But he also ordered a panini at Subway, and he was upset that they didn't have it. So he was a little fancy.
I turned them on. Yeah.
Can you all hear from the table microphones?
Can
The live
say
one
something really closely?
Can you hear this okay? I guess that's to be kind of close.
I need to get a little closer to them then.
Other questions for the panel?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I think it is and it isn't. I still think, at least from sort of my perspective, we're still sort of figuring out how to really and effectively measure engagement in these types of interventions, and I think that requires a lot of thought about how you're going to monitor and track beforehand, which, again, part of what the pilot showed us was sort of what we were tracking, what we weren't, what we wanted to make sure we were tracking in the RCT. So in terms of sort of time, logged in and usage and where they went, and we'll sort of be looking at that in terms of sort of the model of sort of what we think sort of should impact behavior change. And then we are doing sort of traditional RCT stuff. So it's matched to a control site that basically they'll log in, they'll get randomized to health empowerment, which is, has all the interactive features, or they'll get randomized to health empowerment control site, which is just the informational, sort of the Empower Yourself articles around HIV prevention and STD prevention. So modeling after kind of what's currently available that is sort of written for this population but doesn't have the interactive components. And then they'll have baseline interviews, and then they'll also have follow-up. It's supposed to be on it for 3 months. One of the things that we've worked off as well is sort of, it doesn't sort of go to the RCT, sort of the standard is you give them something, and then you give them the control, and then you stop, and then you measure sort of the effects over time. But in the beauty of these interventions is that they should be able to be disseminated, and if you get somebody engaged, why would you stop them from being on it? So what one of the things we're saying is that if the 3 months is kind of the end of the intervention, they don't have to go on anymore. But if you want to, if you like it, if you're engaged with it, keep at it. If you've met people that you want to talk to, please stay on it. And so we'll do a sort of a survival analysis, and don't ask me because Mike Bowling's running that part. But, to sort of see who stayed on and if that had an effect. And then we'll also be doing kind of what we're thinking of as sort of a content analysis of the posts and the conversations to see sort of what are the conversations that happen and how does that impact things like stigma and social norms.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone else have one? Kelly?
So we do recruit online. So what we've decided, and based on the work really by Sheena Bull, is that for online studies to do at least an in-person, the first recruitment meeting is in person. And so we do the first meeting is in person where we walk them through, sign informed consent, verify participant eligibility, and build buy-in for the intervention. And then everything else is done online. So we recruit, though, everywhere. So we recruit
both in sort of physical spaces, clinics, STD clinics, as well as online spaces. So ads on sex sites, geospatial sex sites such as Grindr, Jack, Scruff, as well as sort of Adam for Adam, Craigslist, things like that. So, and then we have community partners. So we'll be having sort of satellite sites in Charlotte, where there's a large YMSM population, and then we have multiple sort of sites around here. So really sort of wide-based recruitment. We don't ask people their status. It's in our academy, but we're not, so they can be positive or negative, and our recruitment sites, sort of what they get.
So Connie really wanted to ask a question in the back. Can we take the prerogative of the panelists to let her ask?
Sure. More quick questions.
Yeah, so it was another thing that we struggled with, is sort of, how do you sort of, again, build buy-in and sort of what would be sort of best. So we actually have it's avatar-based, and they can choose their avatar and decorate, or dress, I guess not decorate, dress their avatar and sort of, again, try and sort of maintain some ownership or some personality of it. And then we have profiles, so but it was things that we thought would sort of, be able to sort of express yourself. So, the last great meal you ate, your favorite book, the songs you're listening to right now, your sign, 3 words that describe you. So they have some personality on the site, but it is anonymous. We encourage, obviously, pseudonyms. And so, however, there are parts of the site that they can upload if they feel comfortable and they want to, pictures themselves, videos of themselves, as well. So, I think, we continue to struggle with sort of that line between sort of confidentiality and anonymity and what sort of really the world is, however, in terms of sort of, social networking and the internet. Oh, yes. Yes. Our consent is long and involved, and then throughout the site, for every sort of section, there are guidelines. And that's one of the also reasons why we do it in person. I think, it deserves that attention, specifically around things that, where, you don't want them to feel pressured to have to do anything. And there's no place where they have to sort of divulge any information. They don't have to, make up one comment or do anything. But if they want to, they will. But we, again, need to be very clear about sort of what that means.
So this is a great discussion, and given all the interest, we promise to have Lisa back with version 2. Whatever next year. And certainly people can come down and ask questions after, but we need to wrap up. We would like to thank all of you for coming, and so many of you for staying around for so long. There's obviously a lot of interest in this area, and as I mentioned at the beginning, hopefully this is the first in many years of this symposium. We want to thank all of our speakers and panelists for making this such an engaging and exciting symposium. I think Deb and Seth also want to say thank you, and then Catherine has a couple last announcements.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully next year we'll be back with version 2.0 of this technology symposium, and we can get some more great panel discussions of things that are going on campus. I also want to make a plug for the TI course, since some of the work that we do involves helping researchers who are interested in technology-based interventions to make those dreams a reality. So contact Randall Teal if you're interested in working with the core.
Yeah, thanks all. I want to thank all the speakers again and everyone for coming out. And if we didn't already, we should clearly acknowledge the Center for AIDS Research, CHI-CORE, the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and Lineberger CPC program that teamed up to put this event on. So absolutely look out for 2.0 next year. It's going to be great. It's going to have apps and things flying through the air. You won't even believe it. So you're up for that.
Wow. Great.
Yeah,
so just, I guess, 4 final quick announcements. So there's been some interest in
one of the goals of this symposium was to kind of develop a network of folks who do this work that can be in contact with each other and exchange ideas and news about events. So I had each of you express your interest in being signed up for a listserv. So we're going to be establishing that listserv this week or next week. One of the first things to go out on the listserv will be an evaluation of this event. So please go online and complete that quick evaluation to let us know how it went and how we can improve it later. Other information that will be circulated is certainly going to be about a new initiative that's going on that's kind of a partnership. Kelly Lingle has a big leadership role in it, is spearheading this, the Triangle mHealth Consortium, which is just getting off the ground now, but is sure to have a lot of really interesting events going on very soon. The last thing is a request, if we could exit out this way, because there's going to be an event going on in the second floor, and if we exit out this way, then we won't disturb them. So, thank you all.
Thank you all
very much.